Hey, what's going on? This is Randy from Salem Trials, and I just wanted to take a minute just to go through my guitar setup. So let's dive right in. All right, so this is pretty much my entire rig. It's pretty self-contained. Apart from a cabinet on stage for stage sound, this is everything. So I'll just kind of go through it one at a time. The Helix is kind of the tone hub of everything. I use that as like my amplifier. So I'll dig into the Helix presets in just a second there. But for the stop boxes, got the classic Whammy. We do that for pitch up effects, also just for kind of like an octaver sound. For our latest song, River of Bodies, that thing's on almost the whole song. Then we've got the drop pedal here. Most of our songs are in drop A flat. Some of them are in drop F. So it just helps us having to, not have to change guitars during a show. And the momentary setting is super useful as well. We use that in the song Immolation in the main riff, with the sustaining chords. We hit F for just a single note and then go back to the regular drop 8 flat tuning. So that's super handy to be able to do that. Next up here, we have the mini wah from Dunlop. It doesn't get a ton of use, but every once in a while I like to turn it on during a solo or a riff just to kind of add some different flavor or vibe to it. I do have gates going on in the Helix too, but I like having the control on my pedal board for certain tighter rhythm passages where I really want that extra control, or if a particular stage or monitor setup's a little bit noisier, or if I'm just feeding back a little more than usual, it's nice to have the physical control right there instead of having to menu dive on the Helix. And here's the Fortin 33. This thing is on all the time. This is probably my favorite pedal I've ever had. Basically just like a tube screamer with a really snarly, kind of angry sounding EQ. So this is the tone without. Kind of flubby with. Yeah, that thing is on all the time. Leads, cleans, doesn't matter. I adjust my clean patches just so I don't have to turn that off. So that thing's on throughout the whole set. This one's a bit newer. It's been seeing a lot of use since I got it. This is the Abominable Effects Demon Lung pedal. It's a gross fuzz. It's pretty cool. It's got like a blend knob. So at any given time, I'm usually blending about 50%. There's also two different preset settings on it. You can do one's a little bit more mid-scooped, which is this. This one's a little bit more mid-forward. I definitely prefer the mid-forward one a lot, but the scooped one is pretty cool for certain, if you have the octaver on. Oh yeah, that one's been getting a lot of use, especially on the new EP we're about to release soon. Then right over here, I've got the Powerstage 170 as my power amp. So I run a signal without the cab sim from the Helix. I'll show you how I have it split up in there in just a second. So no cab sim sound goes to the Powerstage, which then goes to a cabinet on stage for stage sound. I love having the EQ on board. So if I'm using a different backline, I can kind of adjust if it's a cab I'm not used to, or say Marshall cabs are always pretty bright. So you kind of have that control. And then right over there, I've got the wireless from Shure, the Shure GLX-D16. Also defaults as my tuner as well, and there's a mute on the tuner, so that's super useful. I'm not plugged in right now just because I'm at home, but yeah, that thing's great. And then, the Helix itself, which I'll dive into the Helix patch in just a second. So here's my Helix edit window. I'm going to start you off on my rhythm patch. Sounds like this. So for amp, I'm using the PV Vitriol lead. Settings as such. That one's really cool. I've tried a bunch of the amps in here. I feel like that's kind of the best one I'm using right now. This is always a work in progress, so the preset changes pretty often, but this is what I've got going on currently. Start of the chain, we've got a noise gate. I do have the settings changing per snapshot. So if you go in here to controller assign, you can basically assign any setting you want to a controller. So I set the threshold knob to the snapshot setting. So that way, for each different snapshot I have here, and there is quite a few, I can change the how the gate reacts. This isn't on all the time. I've got a fuzz here. It was basically on the preset before I got the demon lung pedal. So now I just use the demon lung pedal, but this was kind of the fuzz I was using before. The KWB is pretty cool. I've got a chorus for basically just the nocturnal rhythm kind of riff. Pretty cool. On some of the settings too, I've got like a very light reverb. So nothing as intense as my lead patch, just a mild spring. Set up here for, you know, the mod rhythm. There's a little bit of reverb on it. I do have just like a rhythm with reverb too. I use that for the song Ashes and Ember for the kind of riff like that where it goes back and forth. Kind of helps add some ambience, but most of the time on the general rhythm, there's no reverb at all. I have a lo-fi rhythm. For a couple of those guitar transition parts. A couple of these are unused as well, but those are kind of the main ones, like the rhythm, the mod, the lo-fi, and then the reverb rhythm. So that's about it for this guy. Then if we go over here to the lead patch. So a lot of the time for the leads, I'll turn the ISP on my board off. There is still a little gate here. I've got a chorus on this as well. That's mainly for whenever we play the song Divided. It's a pretty intense. I have it set up as I think the vibrato, yeah. Well, that one's an F, so I'll turn on the drop. Cool and warbly. So the way I kind of have my leads set up, there's like my normal lead. I got one with a little bit more reverb. And then one that's absolutely soaked. So depending on the part and how kind of background I want it to be, you know, there's one of the new songs that you'll hear on the EP. There's like a very reverby part that I use the really wet reverb for, and then kind of go back to the typical lead for like solos and such. On this one, I'm using the vitriol lead again, a little bit more gain. EQ is set up just a little bit differently. I'll kind of compensate by turning the master down a little bit on the lead patch because the verb and delay blocks add a little bit of volume. I've got a volume here if I need to do any swells. I put that before the reverbs and the delays, just so if you're doing any volume swells, you don't hear all the ambience disappear. Do have an EQ block. I forgot to go over that on the on the rhythm tone, but it's pretty basic. I just have a low cut and a high cut filter. I have it cut around like 10 or 11K on the rhythm patch, and then it's a little bit darker on this one, around 9K. It seems pretty low, but for the live tones, I tend to be pretty aggressive on the the low pass filter, just because whenever you're at that volume, you know, you don't want the guitar tone to be too bright and kind of piercing on the ears. So I tend to make it a little bit softer versus, you know, whenever I record at home, I'll usually turn this off and then maybe just do that in post and Pro Tools. For the reverb itself on this one, I'm using the Glitz, which is pretty cool. Very very kind of ethereal sounding. The delay, Adriatic delay, it's the one I kind of keep coming back to. Just a typical kind of analog sounding delay. Nothing super fancy. There is a little bit of modulation on it, depth, but I have it pretty low. So then here I'll kind of show you how I do my signal split. So I have an FX loop send because I'd use a tiny little pedal patch cable. on the Helix itself, linking between the, say effects send 1 into effects return 1. There's no pedals in between. It's just one little link cable connecting the two outputs there, or the input and the output rather. And then that way, whenever I set the send here, I make my second line the return. So all that really does is take my signal from one path to the other before I put my impulse response in. So that way this line, which I have set to go to the 1/4 inch outputs only, goes to my power amp. And then the one with the impulse response I want goes to the XLR feed. So that way I can always give front of house my own kind of cab sound and then still have an unaffected signal to go to my power amp and then cab on stage. Right now, this kind of changes too, depending on, how I'm feeling in any particular day. I'll rotate the different IRs. Right now, I'm using the one at like Buster Impact Studio ones. I've got IR4 on the lead. I was using IR3 on the rhythm tone. But that always kind of changes depending on how I'm feeling. That's about it for this guy. Of course, I do have, I think, just like another lo-fi lead. It's pretty similar. So let's jump over to the clean patch. Super dreamy. Don't use it a whole lot during the set, but for a few parts for sure. So I've got a delay at the front here, transistor tape, LA Studio comp, the amp. I think I'm using a Vox. Yeah, it's like the Vox AC30 kind of model. Master is pretty cranked, settings as such. This is the tube comp. This is from the old Legacy, so this used to be on like the Pod HD models. I've always liked this compressor a lot. You got to be kind of careful because it does get a little hot or kind of creates some kind of clippy sounds. But if you set it a little more conservatively, it sounds really good. Gets the compression that I'm looking for. I've got another low and high cut filter. This one's set pretty low too. Like I get most of the kind of high end from the reverb trails. I don't want a lot of ice pickiness from the clean itself. Usually they're pretty dark. So for the reverbs, I've got the particle verb, which is again a Legacy model. I love this reverb so much. It's very shimmery. The dwell, you can, if you crank it, just kind of infinitely creates ambience, which is cool. If you put it on the critical or hazard, it gets a little bit kind of wonky with some weird effects, but very cool sounding reverb. The plateau I have in parallel. This one I think is just a little bit more kind of chill. Here, if I bypass this one. I'll mute that too if we crank that. Yeah, a little bit simpler. That kind of just creates like the general reverb sound. So a little bit more of the immediate reverb, let's say, and then this is kind of all my dreamy trails. Yeah, I could listen to that all day. Here we have the same kind of signal split happening. I do have a secondary EQ here too, so sometimes because there's so much compression, you'll hear a little bit of like extra kind of hiss coming through, so sometimes I'll just tame that before it goes to the power amp. And then here is just my pure space effect. You kind of got to be careful to how you play through this one. Like you can't really, I usually do like single notes or very slow kind of picked single notes to kind of just create that ambient swells. If you pick too hard or play on the low strings, it'll just kind of get way too noisy. So here I have a particle verb first with like the mix almost all the way up. So it's almost all reverb. That's hitting the amp. I've got like a jazz Rivet amp. Another tube comp. More reverbs. Everything is kind of in series too, just because I kind of wanted to create like mostly a reverb. then less guitar sound. This is the octo verb, which is very shimmery, almost pure shimmer. Particle verb again with a little bit less mix. High and low cut again. And then, yeah, same thing. I'm probably still using, IR4 on this guy. I forgot the IR I was doing on the clean patch. Probably the same thing again. Our Helix is a little glitchy whenever I've got the screen record on. There we go. Let's open that up. Yeah, IR3. Okay, so yeah, that's about it for these guys. Whenever I have it dialed in a little bit more, I might make like a preset pack you can download or something. Let me know if that's something you might be interested in. I can get on that. But yeah, so that's everything in Helix Edit. And that's pretty much sums up all the sounds I use. Like I said, whenever I record at home, I'll usually turn off the aggressive high and low cut filters and use the one in Post and Pro Tools instead. But overall, this is pretty much my entire setup. So that about covers it. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to listen to the latest Salem trial song, River of Bodies. You can also pre-order our upcoming EP, Rot, available everywhere September 27th through Seek and Strike Records. Peace out.